Hey guys, welcome to the Grapplezilla Podcast. And today I'm honored to have a friend of mine named Andy Campbell from Scotland. He runs an amazing Instagram and YouTube page called Martial Mindset. The guy has so much knowledge on martial arts. He is a very hardcore martial artist himself. Being a Scot, he's got that Scottish viewpoint and intellect going into fighting. And we're going to ask him some stuff about Scotland too. Yeah. And here we go. Andy, nice to meet you, man. And nice to see you finally.
It's good to finally see you too. And it's an honour to be on your podcast as well.
Thank you very much. Andy, I got to say, I run an Instagram page, and Martial Mindset is one that caught my eye, and we started doing some collaborations.
Yeah.
But what gets me the most on martial art, like what I really like, and guys, you got to check his Instagram out, is you cover like a full spectrum of martial arts and really into the history of especially modern mixed martial arts, as well as martial arts coming into mixed martial itself. Yes. So how did that start?
So for the Martial Mindset, I had these ideas kind of bouncing around in my head for a long time. I'm a lifelong martial artist myself, and I used to go on walks with my wife, and we would talk about different ideas. And originally I thought about maybe making a blog or something to put online, but that's kind of really old fashioned, and not many people, I think, do blogs or even read blogs nowadays. So at the time I was on Instagram personally, but I didn't have I wasn't really using it much, to be honest. And when I went onto my Instagram and I seen other people like yourself, Grapplezilla and some of the other channels, I just decided to do something similar, because I think the visual and the audio format's really good for this kind of thing. So that's how it kind of started. And I have a lot of spare time because I'm a school teacher, so we get long holidays. I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but we get like 7 weeks in the summer. Right. Yeah, so I had a bit of spare time in my hands, and I just started making some clips and putting them out there, and got a really good response. So that's the direction of travel,
So, first of all, you do have an amazing page. I love it.
Yeah.
How did you get into martial arts? Because everyone has their origin story. I want to hear about Andy Campbell's origin story in Scotland. How did you get into martial arts?
So at about age 3. At the time, I've got a brother who's 2 years older than me, and he was getting picked on. He was getting bullied at the time when he first started school. We start school in Scotland around 5 years old, and he was getting picked on at school. And I would see my brother coming home crying and upset because this was happening. And round about the same time, there was lots of martial arts films, like Karate Kid was there. We had everybody's dad spoke about Bruce Lee, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the whole thing. So there was just a lot of martial arts in the culture. And I think subconsciously I sort of seen martial arts as a way to defend myself and to prevent this kind of thing, the same kind of thing happening to me. So I started off in Taekwondo. And I think I started at quite a young age, at 4 years old, which is quite unusual. But I really enjoyed it, and just seen it as a way to increase my confidence and to,
Did you do ITF or WTF?
It was ITF Taekwondo at the time, but it wasn't like a competition type school. It was more of a traditional club at the time, and we did a lot of kind of like patterns and forums. In karate, I think they call those katas. And we did compete. At one point in time, I competed almost every weekend, but it was the kind of, I don't know if you know, like semi-contact point stop sparring. So it wasn't maybe the most effective for fighting, as I later found out. But I really did enjoy it as a kid, and it was a discipline, So,
did you find it helped you with your flexibility or long distance?
I mean, my flexibility at the time was outstanding through Taekwondo. I could do the splits, like Jean-Claude Van Damme. I could go between two chairs. I could do the splits front ways, back ways. Taekwondo, that's one of the main things that it was great for. was developing that kicking base and the flexibility, and I wish I had kept that up, because now I'm grappling. Flexibility is good for guard retention, and I wish I still had some of that hip mobility that I had back in the day, you know.
So I remember we were just speaking before, guys. We were speaking before the. We've been speaking actually for a few weeks, but we were speaking before the podcast. And, you know, Andy also went from Taekwondo and he started to get into Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, of course. So what was the catalyst, Andy, that made you decide to go to more of this, let's say, competitive martial arts or combat-based martial arts?
So I did Taekwondo for years, and as I've alluded to there, that when I needed it, and you know, people get into fights at school and things like that, and my Taekwondo at the time, when I started getting into fights and stuff, I was almost like a black belt already, and I felt as if it didn't really help me. It was good fun, and I enjoyed competing, I enjoyed practicing the art, but it was pretty ineffective when it came to the crunch, you know. And at the time, I used to watch a show in the UK. It was called Now's the Time Night of Combat, and it was a kickboxing based show. And they had Muay Thai fights on this show. So it was something that was in the back of my mind. And at the same time, I used to go on to, I think it was things like Napster and LimeWire and things like that, and I would download clips of Muay Thai. And one of the guys, he was actually Canadian, I can remember going away back. He was called Mike Miles.
Mike Miles. He has a gym in Calgary.
Yeah.
Very good mark. Very good Muay Thai guy. Also does jiu-jitsu. Yeah, I know him.
Oh, does? Oh, you know Mike, right? So
I don't know him personally. I know of him. Yeah, because I'm from Edmonton, the better city.
Right. So back then, I would download clips. He had short instructional videos of Muay Thai, showing the basics, you know, the fundamentals, and I would take those wee moves and stuff and try them out in my Taekwondo classes, and and it was just something different. And also at the same time, I came away from Taekwondo for a couple of years, and at the same time, all of my friends were doing boxing. The amateur boxing scene's pretty big in Scotland. That's really popular.
And they're good.
They're really good. Scotland's produced a lot of good boxers. So my friends were going there, and I decided to join them at boxing. And I can remember going in, and I was hitting the bag, and one of the old school boxing coaches came up to me, and he said, "Look, everything you're doing's wrong from the ground up. The way you're standing, you know, your balance is off, the way you're throwing your punches." Because I had that Taekwondo base, and we don't really focus heavily on boxing side of things. And I think as a natural progression, I didn't really like boxing as an art form. I found it really difficult because I couldn't kick and I couldn't move in the same way. And at the same time, one of my friends was doing Muay Thai, and he took me along to try it. And when I arrived in the Muay Thai gym, I was like, this is what I've been looking for all my life, you know. There was like people kicking bags and hitting pads and grunting, and there was like plaster falling from the ceiling. It was just really raw.
Tong Po came in the house.
Exactly. It was like an old shed type thing we used to train in. It had no running, like no hot water. It was really dingy, mouldy.
In the winter too?
In the winter too. You know something?
Scottish winters, man.
In the Scottish winters, the mats used to actually be frozen. Some ones we would go in, and then the coach would have to put on like a industrial building site heater, like a jet heater, to defrost the mats. So it was basically, and it was the best time of my life. You know, the group of people that we had there at the time, we all trained together. The camaraderie was excellent, and it was just, I just really fell in love with Muay Thai.
Did you have the smell of Tiger Balm in the gym?
The smell of Thai oil.
Yeah, Thai oil.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I got that in my eye once.
Oh.
It was the gift that kept on giving. You know, so wait, okay, so you started in Muay Thai in terms of your modern martial arts.
Yeah.
And then you went to Jiu-Jitsu. I'd imagine that because I heard you use Napster and everything that it was a while ago. So I don't know if Jiu-Jitsu really came into Scotland back then, right? So how did you get in that?
Right, so Jiu-jitsu was in Scotland at that point in time, but it was so rare. There was only maybe 2 or 3 guys, I think, that were actually doing it. Muay Thai was very popular at the time. So I think I started Muay Thai when I was 20 years old, which is,
Okay.
It's quite late. And so Jiu-Jitsu came much later in life. I think I was 33, so 2018 when I started. And I'd always fancied, ever since watching UFC 1 and seeing what Hoist was able to do, I'd always fancied grappling arts, but I'd never taken the leap to go and try them. And I kind of wish, looking back, because I had 2 options when I was younger. I could train in either Taekwondo or Judo. And looking back, I sometimes wonder if I made the right choice, because, it's like, at the time, martial arts for me were kicking and punching. That's what you were seeing on the screen.
Yeah, for sure.
So that was hugely popular.
Everyone wanted to be Bruce Lee, right?
Everybody wanted to be Bruce Lee, including me, But Jiu-Jitsu is something that I'd always wanted to try. And I think I did try Judo as well in my kind of mid-20s. And I enjoyed it, but it was very, very hard on the body. And because I'd never really trained, learned how to break fall and learned how to do techniques properly, it was kind of like boxing. It was too hard to pick up at a later stage.
There's a lot of truth in that. Like, a lot of guys, there's a saying I always tell, I'm a bit older, I'm 45. I imagine you're in the same area.
Yeah.
And one thing, if I would ever tell someone, who, hindsight is 2020. When we look back, right, we say, oh man, had I gone to judo, had I continued wrestling, took it really hard, would I go to stuff like that. So we've all been there. What is interesting is to start at an older age, like 33, as you said. That is actually quite interesting, especially coming from, you have a proper valid striking background. You're a striker, for sure. Before you went to jiu-jitsu, right?
Yes.
What school, did you start in gi, not gi? Was it more self-defense, sport-oriented?
Right, so I started off, the wee club that we trained at first, I started off in gi, and my instructor was a former Gracie Barra guy. So it's that whole thing where you learn the fundamentals and you cycle through. I don't know if you know how the Gracie Barra thing works. It's a curriculum.
Yeah.
And you start, and it's good for learning the basics, the fundamentals, and then you kind of cycle those. But I feel as if it never really takes you past that point.
Yeah.
In my experience, we went to Gracie Barra school, but just because my instructor had come from that background, he was very focused on the old school kind of self-defense type stuff. So it was like standing headlock escapes or these things, which I did enjoy doing, but I think it lacked the training maybe lacked a bit of realness, if that makes sense. It wasn't as competitive. So I now train at a different place, which is more of a kind of competition-based school. It's actually an MMA school, and I feel as if it's more sport-orientated, and we train a wee bit different, so it's better, to be honest.
Do you, I think every martial artist, I mean, it sounds very philosophical, I'm going to say now, but we all have our journey, right?
Yeah.
Your journey obviously started to become probably like a lot of us, to be Bruce Lee. And then what happened is the UFC came, or we saw more competitive arts. And it's quite interesting because as we get older, and I don't think you and I are there yet, maybe I am, we start to even change the way we look at it. I went through something very similar to you where the jiu-jitsu that I wanted to learn more of the competitive stuff, especially towards MMA. Do you find that at your MMA school that you teach it, is it more towards sport jiu-jitsu or even towards MMA that you learn, or both, or probably no gi, I'm guessing?
I do a combination of both. I still train in the gi, and I'm only a blue belt, so I've got a long ways to go. So I'm going to stay in the gi for a while. But I do no gi as well, which I really enjoy actually. But I'm not training for MMA at this age and stage. It's not something that's even crossed my mind. I don't even really compete, to be honest, in jiu-jitsu.
That's cool.
I've only competed once at white belt tournament. I think I came away with silver in the gi, and I really enjoyed it. But it's a lot of extra work. And you've got a family, you've got a job, you've got martial mindset. There's lots going on there. So I'm kind of at that age when I'm 39 years old. I'm looking for a happy medium, like a balance between the two. And I do quite like the idea of the old school jiu-jitsu, the kind of more self-defense orientated stuff.
The way when we get older, it's funny. We kind of, I've noticed that with a lot of guys,
Yeah. Yeah, you start off, you think, you want to be a champion, you want to be a world beater, and you want to train for the sport and progress in the sport. But as you start to age and get older, you realise that's not everything. And
yeah,
I mean, I don't know how you feel. I feel as if jiu-jitsu's probably changed, just looking at the history.
absolutely.
It's changed over the years, and it's become like everything else, like boxing. It's a really specialised sport that's good for fighting other jiu-jitsu people. But when you look back to the old Gracie challenge matches and the old school, it was maybe more self-defense and maybe more realistic. It was kind of more like MMA back then. So,
for sure, I think the peak of jiu-jitsu in terms of effectiveness for a fight, and I'll probably get a lot of heat of this, but it's my opinion. If you guys, if you have an art, if you want to tell me wrong, listen, I'm always up to learn. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. No problem. I think it was that Carlson Gracie Brazilian top team. That was the very peak of when it was mixed, still jiu-jitsu that worked. And I think you're 100%. I think it got kind of like where sport karate went in the 80s.
yes.
Before you had Kyokushinkai, these guys were like fighting, breaking cars. I have no idea, breaking walls. And then it became so specialized because of the business. And in one way, jiu-jitsu becoming specialized is beautiful because you see some really cool stuff. But then again, we kind of look at the especially for older guys, like you're saying, if I get into a fight, which it is known to happen in Scotland, especially Edinburgh, from what I'm hearing.
Not often.
But if you get into a good old fist fight, do you want to be pulling like a Berimbolo? I'm sure you could if you're world class, but I don't think you want it, right?
It's more like, do you want to spend all your time learning Berimbolo when you could learn, basics like how to hold mount properly, how to keep control of somebody? It's like, as a guy at my age, Berimbolo is bad for my neck, just being honest.
How much do you weigh? Are you a big guy, small guy?
A small guy, so maybe about 80 kilograms. Is that? I don't know what that is in.
That's actually pretty. You're like an average guy. You're like
average sized person, yeah. But I find that kind of jiu-jitsu, like a pit bull. I find that kind of jiu-jitsu for me is just it's too much at this age. It's too difficult. So I'm caught in a funny place where I want to train the old school type of self-defense stuff, but I want to train it alive. I don't want to do it static. Where you're doing the kind of headlock escape and then that's the end of the story and there's no you never get to actually test it in sparring. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. There's a guy, I'm sure you know about him, Tim Kennedy, UFC fighter. He was a Green Beret. Guys has an amazing Instagram, but what I like about his jiu-jitsu is they really do, they train how I think you like they'll take a self-defense scenario, but they will go live. Like absolutely live, and I think like that is the goal, in my opinion.
That for me would be so. If there was a school like that near me, I would definitely consider training there. During the COVID pandemic, myself and my wife, we changed our whole. We've got a big double garage, and we put mats in there, and we did the Gracie University, the Gracie Combatives program. And it's quite like that, it teaches you, I think it's like 36 moves from old school Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So it is things like your headlock escape, on the ground, standing up, your leg hook takedown, all these things. But you do, I think it's like kind of reaction training. So rather than it being live, you give your partner some scenarios that could happen in a real confrontation, Whereas I think modern sport jiu-jitsu, you're only really dealing with scenarios that could happen in a jiu-jitsu match against another
Absolutely.
practitioner. So we
Donkey
kind of,
guard.
yeah, things like that. It's just, it gets really specialised. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think the modern sport guys, they would do really well in a self-defense scenario, in my
Sure.
opinion, because they're athletes, you know?
Yeah, they're athletes and they're used to the emotional. I think a lot it's to do with the emotional. When you get hit, for example, the first time you're Muay Thai and you really sparred, do you remember you got like really nailed?
Yeah.
There is that emotional experience of going, okay, whoa, I've been dinged right now. What do I do? And in
Experience.
jiu-jitsu, having like a big lad on top, you put his forearm on your face and you're like, oh my God, this is really not like a Sunday dinner, right?
Yeah.
But emotionally, you get used to it. That great, it's funny. I go on some podcasts too, and I've seen a lot of people pro Gracie, anti. I kind of stand back and I just like to look at it. But I
Mm-hmm.
do think they have a few things that I think they do world class. I think they're really good instructors. I think they know how to convey in a teaching method how
Yeah.
to learn, and I think their curriculum when it comes down to self defense, it's very nice. And I'm a big guy, okay?
Yeah.
Now I'm bigger because, yeah, I have some health issues, but I'm a big guy. I wrestled in pretty much my whole life, jiu-jitsu, everything. But I used to have a friend, pro MMA fighter, and he saw me walking down the street, this ass.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see him. And all of a sudden, he puts me in a headlock, okay? What is the thing I did? The Gracie Jiu Jitsu headlock,
Yes.
standing escape. Went
Bang.
behind,
Yep.
slammed him down, went on
One
top,
down.
and I was about to hit him, and he's
Mm-hmm.
laughing. I said, "Whoa!" And I said, man, this Gracie Jiu Jitsu, it actually works, right?
It actually works.
It
So
actually works. It
there's
doesn't look pretty,
no,
but it works because you
there,
can remember it. That's
yep.
what's good about it.
There's definitely value in it, and I think a lot of the controversy came from the online belt promotion system. So I
Sure.
think at first they were offering you could do a blue belt remotely, and that caused a huge stir in the community. Understandably, I think that is wrong. Your instructor really needs to be on the mat with you, and they need to be monitoring you on a class by class basis to know if you're a real blue belt. They have since changed that up, and I think that the way they do it is a Gracie Combatives belt, so it's like a white belt with a blue stripe on it. We
Okay.
never ever got the belt. We weren't really interested in doing the tests to get the belt, but we found the videos and the curriculum really helpful for relative beginners. Again, though, I think it's one of these things where you could complete the course and it's never going to make you a sport jiu-jitsu guy. It's not in depth enough and it's not modern enough. It's not up to date with the current meta. But if you're somebody who just wants to train for self-defense, then it's a decent course. It really is.
Would you agree on this? On what I'm going to say right now. So, for example, there is a difference between being a professional fighter or competitor and self-defense. And I have Tourette
Yeah.
syndrome, so if you see me ticking, I'm not high on
No,
glue
no,
or something.
no problem, man.
So I always like to look at self-defense like if I was going to teach my mom
Right.
or my daughter or a very small statured man who's 50 kilos, for example, and not an athlete, how to defend themselves, what would be the best way for them to defend themselves because they're not Francis Ngannou.
That's
And I
true.
think the way you look at self-defense, especially in terms of jiu-jitsu, is much different comparative to sport jiu-jitsu that you would see Nicky Rod doing a move. So
Yeah.
would you say that self-defense is more geared towards the average person to go in a situation where they don't know the fight is coming,
Yeah.
surprise is there, and now they need to defend? Yeah?
I think it should be geared towards that kind of person. And I think that's what the Gracie Combatives course does pretty well because I don't know if you're familiar with it. They talk about kind of green zone, red zone, which would be the striking, if you're within
Oh,
distance. And then green zone again is when you're really uptight and you're close to your partner,
yeah.
limiting the potential to be knocked out by strikes. And I think even that one thing, that's like one of the first things they teach you. But that's really valuable for anybody in a self-defense type situation. Because if you just basically grab a hold of somebody and wrap yourself around about them, it becomes very difficult. Like, you need to watch, obviously, they don't pick you up and slam you if you're so much smaller. But I think, yeah, definitely. I think going down the road of sport jiu-jitsu is good for sport jiu-jitsu, if that's what you want to do, and it will make you a tougher person in general, as as you've alluded to, with the training is difficult, so you'll develop a kind of fighting spirit. But I think self-defense is a different thing, and what I would teach anybody is it's always better to walk away if you have the option. If you can break grips and disengage and get away, that's the number one goal
Yeah.
of self-defense, is coming home safe.
He who walks away lives to fight another day, right?
Especially in this day and age, I think it's so important. Just even with the way the law is in the UK.
Wow. Yes. Wow, that is scary. One thing you're defending yourself, and the next thing you have a defense attorney, and that's. Now, I want to ask you, because you said the word tough, and whenever I hear tough, I think of a few peoples around the world, and one just happens to be Scotland.
Thanks, man.
Backhold wrestling.
Yes.
Scottish backhold. So I know there's not a lot on it. I did a few videos on it. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried it or seen it? Do you know anything about it?
I have actually tried it. So a long time ago, when I was still doing Muay Thai, we used to do these events where different martial arts would come together for the general public, and we would do like a showcase of our style to try and get new students. And Scottish backhold wrestling was always there. It was always represented there, and you had the opportunity to go and try it. So me and one of my pals went, and we kind of, it's that way you lock your arms in a bit. It's like a body lock almost, from what I can remember. You're not allowed to collar tie. You're not allowed to take like kind of Muay Thai grips or anything. And then I think the object of the game is just to throw your partner, hip toss your partner, and get on top of them. And what I noticed was I actually became friendly with a couple of guys that are heavily involved in the backhold wrestling scene. And they're all judo guys as well. That's one thing. Judo or wrestling, they all kind of compete in both. I think one of the guys that I was friends with, he refereed the backhold wrestling, and I think they do it at like the Highland Games. It's like a cultural type thing. It's pretty cool. I think every culture, every place has got a wrestling culture, as you know, and that's ours. So it should be bigger than it is. It should be celebrated because it's really unique and different. You know
what's interesting about folk wrestling styles, even though it's is a lot of the judokas from the stands, like Asia and around some of the East Europeans as well. They actually, a lot of these guys don't start in judo. They would start in their folk wrestling styles, which are belt wrestling or satsao, where you couldn't even break the grip. And then they would translate that into judo very easily. And that's why you saw, especially older judo, you saw a lot of moves, especially with the Russians coming in and all the republics coming in. So I think that a lot of people write them off because they're not, these arts, because they're not marketed properly.
Yes.
But first of all, the rules of them are quite nice to work with because you're put into a parameter that you develop certain attributes. What I saw in Scottish backhold wrestling, when I saw that, I actually thought of big Scottish guys who are able to throw cabers, like caber tossing, and then you would wrestle these guys. And I was like, when I think of that, like the Scottish games, I think of like power, like this.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't know. I think that backhold wrestling against like 100-kilo Scottish guy who can toss a caber like 10 meters, it's not going to be easy.
It's not going to be easy at all. I noticed you posted a video, a reel on Instagram, maybe a couple of days ago. It was Cornish. It looked very similar. It was some sort of Cornish wrestling. Yeah.
It's from a good friend of mine named War Yoga. He also has a page, and he's very much into that. And all these wrestling styles need to be, in my opinion, they need to be remembered. A Scottish backhold, I think, is one of the big ones. I think we really need to know that one.
Yeah.
And they have Cornish, and you have the British Isles has tons of that. And I asked this guy, War Yoga, I said, what happened? Catch as catch can wrestling came from England, which from freestyle wrestling basically came out of folk style, came out of it. I said, the English invented this. It could have been Scottish. Could be, I don't know who actually invented it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, the actual guy, we know who did, but why is England not good? And he blames that all these wrestling styles got nailed by Victorianism and the fact that people saw it as barbaric and not cultured enough. So
Oh, right.
I think
That's really
that
interesting.
was the best answer because it has to be asked, man. Like
Yeah, yeah. Why?
100 years
Yeah.
ago, you go to Scotland or like Ireland or obviously Ireland's not part of the Britain. Well, I mean that's an argument. I'm not even getting into that one. But
Yeah.
you know, I mean, you have like collar and elbow wrestling, corn shy wrestling, all this. Why
Yeah.
isn't what happened to it? You know, is it that the Brits aren't wrestlers? No, they're natural fighters. Have you seen the rugby team? Have you seen the Scottish rugby
Yeah.
team? You know,
Yeah.
the Highland Games. They're like in strongman competitions. They're like perfectly made for this. What happened? Victorianism and I don't know. It's sad to see because yeah, it's
Yeah,
history, man.
because sometimes we go looking for answers in different martial arts from all across the globe. I mean, Brazilian jiu-jitsu or Japanese jiu-jitsu or these things, but we have good answers right on our doorstep that have always been
Yes,
here. In wrestling, I think every country, from what I can see, you'll know more about this, but every country and every culture has a wrestling culture. And I could be wrong, but I think it might have been a rite of passage at some point in time. So that
for
young
sure.
men had to compete in wrestling, boxing to prove themselves as men,
Yeah,
and I think that's maybe what's been lost in modern times.
absolutely. And also, I mean, let's look at Scotland. 600, 800 years ago, you know, what were men concerned about? They were concerned about, first of all, food, winter, of
Yeah,
course, having a good whiskey, and
yeah,
definitely war, right? Being
well,
attacked. So, how do you get a? They didn't have guns, and they had
yeah,
swords. But what happens is the truth is there was a red zone, a green zone, and a green zone even back then,
of
and
course,
the green zone, of course, and red zone were the sword. But if someone didn't have a sword, they're gonna wrestle, man. And I think
yeah.
that was a great way to train their soldiers. But it's a good question. It's a good. I
It's
think it's a rite of
also,
passage.
I think it was possibly a rite of passage, and I think it's also something about status in your community because if you were the local backhold wrestling champion, you would have a higher status, in my opinion,
Of
than
course.
everybody under. It's like being the boxing champion of the world. Like, why do people want to put themselves through that to become? Because it comes with the money, it comes with the fame, it comes with the status that brings.
I even
And I
think in
think it's just,
Scotland the status might have been higher because you can
yeah,
protect.
exactly. That makes perfect sense. And I think in some ways it's never left us. We're just seeking it in different ways. So, like, like people compete in judo and get to the Olympics, which is wrestling, judo, all these grappling arts. There's a lot of commonality between
For
them.
sure. Yeah.
The striking arts are the same. You take like Muay Thai, kickboxing, Taekwondo. The only thing that changes is the rule set. That's the only
Yeah.
thing that really changes. But I think people are seeking the same the same things from them. You know.
And the rule set will always the benefit of rule sets is you get certain level of attributes, and because of that, the technical approach to deal with that rule set is very different, and thus you
Yeah.
get, for example, Thai kicks compared to spinning back kicks in Taekwondo.
Yes. That was actually a big problem when I started training Muay Thai. I was so used to the way that we kicked in Taekwondo that it was actually a hindrance more than a help, to be honest. Because as you know, in Taekwondo you chamber your kicks. So it's like you bend at the knee and you flick your leg up, kind of think like Jean-Claude Van Damme style kicking. And in Thai boxing you kick through the target. You literally swing your whole leg and your arms and your whole body through the pads. And it took me, because I had trained for years in Taekwondo, it took my coach hours and hours of work to unlearn some of the bad habits I was making because of that. So I would imagine grappling arts can be the same as well. If
For
you
sure.
learn something that's specific to a certain rule set and you cross over into another, you need to then unlearn before you can go move forward. Um,
Yeah, I think in
yeah,
striking, what I notice, it has a lot to do with the distance that attacks are done.
Yes.
And the distance of that. And grappling, the one thing I see is, other than grips, is the pressure, where pressure is put. What I mean by pressure is like how to open up, because pressure causes mistakes and it causes
Yes.
things to happen. So I think, like, for example, if you take a wrestler and you put him in jiu-jitsu setting,
Yeah.
he understands pressure, but when he's on his bottom, especially on his back, he might not know how the pressure works compared to a jiu-jitsu guy, as well as
Yeah.
a lot of the BJJ guys. Although they're getting really good at wrestling now, I think the hardest thing to train them is pressure, like how to open up and like slam the head without taking it
Yes.
seriously, you know?
Yeah. That's really interesting that you say that. Like sometimes from time to time judo players will come along to our club to train, and sometimes, especially with that scaffold, the Kesagatame, you can feel this insane. It's like, it's like a ton
Huge,
of,
yeah.
they can apply a ton, especially if you allow them to capture that arm, that arm in the
Oh
head.
yeah.
And that should be all right. So that should be quite an easy move to escape. You can come out to the back there, you can pop yourself out. But it's not, if they really lock you up in that and they know where to put their pressure, it can be devastating. You can almost tap from that position. And I think that's something that I could be wrong, but I think that's something that jiu-jitsu is maybe lacking somewhat.
Yeah. The pin.
The
I
pin.
think the pin. I'm not, and it's the beauty of jiu-jitsu because that pin isn't there. They flow more into submissions, but I
Yeah.
think they should do rounds where they pin, and I think it'll help the jiu-jitsu player, especially when it goes to MMA. That's why I think a lot of these Russians who have a sambo and judo background, they all do wrestling too,
Yeah.
most of them. But when they get on top, they're so used to holding that pin that just hitting is easy. Um, have you ever experienced like rolling with a judo guy?
Yeah. I've rolled with many judo players, and it's different. Especially at the standing portion. If you're in the gi, there's a panic that sets in the minute they lock. And the thing that I've always noticed
Oh
is
yeah,
when you reach for your grips, they literally parry your hands out the way, so they don't allow you to establish grips.
yeah.
First and foremost, they strip grips straight away and they establish their own grips, and then they will throw you. And it's a terror for a guy like me who never got into grappling seriously until I was 33 years old. Getting thrown is it's a scary thing, because one minute you're
For
looking
sure.
at the person, the next minute you can see the ceiling lights, and the next minute you're going through the mat. So, and that's a big part of what put me off pursuing judo as a martial art, is because I wasn't used to being thrown, and
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
got
I
thrown, it
agree.
hurt a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
So jiu-jitsu is for me, it feels like a gentler, softer entry into the grappling arts. Yeah.
It's absolutely true. A lot of guys, I find the hardest part is
Hmm.
I don't think there's enough for older people. I'm talking about who aren't children or teens. When they start
Yeah.
judo, they should do a much more heavy introduction to break falling and more a longer one. So you get
Yeah.
used to, like, for example, break falling from your knees even for like weeks and then go higher. So it's that impact that really hurts. And also the thing is, what's the real difference is
Hmm.
when you throw a judoka or a wrestler or
Hmm.
samboist on the ground, they're usually quite relaxed, right? And because they're
Yes.
relaxed and they fall properly, they don't feel it as hard. And in my opinion, when a lot of the guys who aren't used to that, they're very, because it's tense. It is scary for people who aren't used to it, just like it's scary for a grappler to go in the ring
Yeah.
and spar, right? It's the
Exactly.
exact same. And then they get this wake up call and they're like, okay, I don't like that. It's not that
Hmm.
people say, oh, they're pussy. It's not. Because if you would land like that straight and with anxiety, it would hurt too. So I think you're 100% right on that.
Yeah.
But the comedy of it
Hmm.
is, I find what you said about jiu-jitsu 100% true. I think it's softer. But that said, I found that all my big injuries came from jiu-jitsu. I don't
Really?
understand how that. Yeah, I had some in wrestling, but I think it was just. I don't know why. Maybe it's because you put yourself into more of a position. I don't know, or like long-term injuries.
Like I think things like you spoke about bearing bolos and inverting and things like that. And I think in jiu-jitsu, the temptation's always there to maybe invert underneath somebody and enter in with a leg, or
Yeah.
come out to their back, or do these kind of things. And the danger can be there, I think, when somebody's applying pressure to you and you're trying some of these jiu-jitsu moves, these newer school techniques, bad things can happen. Whereas if you're sticking to the old, like closed guard, and you're keeping something nice and tight, and you're looking at it maybe from the older school Gracie perspective of like self-defense first, controlling the wrist, controlling the hands, I think you're generally speaking safer. I could be wrong, but I think that's
I
my
agree.
opinion. The modern sport comes with a lot of knee injuries, I've noticed. People getting their knees, jumping guard, and different things like that. That seems to be the common injuries, the knee in jiu-jitsu. But it definitely, for me, it felt a bit softer and easier than judo. But that's maybe just the school that I was training at, possibly.
Now, I have actually an interesting question, because I think one of the things that differentiates a great jiu-jitsu instructor to a good jiu-jitsu instructor is the ability to teach. Now, you yourself are a professional teacher. You've studied that, and you teach currently. Do you find... so I'll give you an example. There's guys who can learn from tapes. There's guys who can't. I have to learn kinesthetically. Like, I have to do it.
Yeah.
Do you find that teaching has also helped you learn better, so you can pick up information much better?
100%. I think the ability to analyse yourself and self-reflect on things that have went well, and things that maybe have went not so well, and then put a plan into action. And that's what jiu-jitsu is really. You throw some moves out onto your partner, and you take what works and you do more of it. You double down, and you take the things that didn't work and you maybe try and improve on them. So I think, and there's a lot of good, what I would say is in jiu-jitsu, in my experience, there's a lot of really, really good teachers. In my opinion, probably better than some classroom teachers, good coaches and teachers, but with all different methods. There's no one way. Like, I think some jiu-jitsu instructors focus on like technique by technique basis, and others focus more on the overarching principles, which I like, to be honest. That's more my style, and it makes the most sense to me. So just basic things like, keeping those elbows tight to your body at all times, being defensive first, knowing how to properly defend an attacker. That's the type of coaching style that I like, that works for me. But again, everybody's different. It's a big...
Here's a question a little bit off topic.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, in Scotland, how's the MMA scene in Scotland?
It's growing. It's really, really, it's booming at the moment. There's a big show actually tomorrow night called PFL Europe. I don't know if you're familiar with the organisation.
I actually am. Yeah, I am.
In the gym where I train, it's called Higher Level Martial Arts, and we have I think 3 or 4 fighters on that one show. And it's a huge promotion. And I think over the years, people like my coach James Doolan, I don't know if you know, he's been involved in the MMA scene for as long as I can remember. I think he originally came from kickboxing and Muay Thai, and he's just for me, he's one of the best coaches in the country, maybe even the world, to be honest. And the guy's like an encyclopedia of knowledge about mixed martial arts, and I think the scene in Scotland is just booming at the moment, and it's only going to get better. But some of these young guys that are coming through that have trained in MMA from day one, they've mixed the styles. They just look to me to be in a completely different level, the way they're picking things up, and the wrestling's getting better as well, I've noticed. In the past,
Yeah.
the UK guys, I think that was their weak point. I think they had jiu-jitsu and they had striking for sure, but the wrestling and the transitions between the two, I think, for me at least, they were always lacking compared to the Americans, and so the Europeans, I think, have always lacked that. solid wrestling base
Yeah.
for MMA. Yeah. But no, I think the scene's moving forward, so it's
So with
interesting.
with the British Isles,
Hmm.
the way I saw it, I think they're starting to pick up in wrestling. Actually, I'm seeing some really good stuff lately.
Yeah.
I think definitely in the grounds they're there. You have really good guys. In the last CGI, you had a British guy there who in the under eight. I think it was under 80. He was tapping a lot of guys, and it was
Who was it?
his jiu-jitsu was. I forgot the name. There was one. I think it was Liam something. I think he might have been in. He's from the summit. I think he was from London Submissions. What's
Yeah.
the London Shoot Fighters? I think it
London Shoot
is.
Fighters, possibly. Yeah, yeah.
I
That's a
think
long
he's from there.
established. Yeah,
Long established. Like that is from
yeah.
the beginning, right?
That's yeah,
Uh, yeah, those guys are like epic levels, right? But I believe he's from there. Sorry if I got it wrong, but his jiu-jitsu was, I mean, especially his guard play. I was like, it was scary good,
yeah,
and also the British Isles, the striking they have and the ability to just say, "Hey, laddie, let's just throw down." They're ready,
yeah.
you know. Plus, they had the Cage Warriors for years and
Which
years.
was
That
yeah,
awesome tournament. I mean, if you want to see like
Cage-
proper violence,
yeah.
that's the one.
So Cage Warriors is still on the go. Cage Warriors is still there. It's like a kind of feeder promotion for the UFC, and a lot of the guys that come through Cage Warriors, they go into like one guy who's fighting this weekend, Stephen Ray. I don't know if you know Stephen Braveheart Ray. He actually
No, I
landed
don't.
a thing called the Scottish Twister on Anthony Pettis. So he trains at
Really?
the same. Yeah, that's a cool. I'll send you the clip.
Please do.
He trains with us up in higher level. So I mean, the jiu-jitsu I think has been there for many years, and there's so many people at high level, jiu-jitsu now in the UK, and I think that's why the sport has been really beneficial. The explosion of the sport.
Yeah,
And I think the no-gi, and I could be wrong, but I think it translates better to MMA as well,
for sure.
the no-gi
Yeah,
stuff. So it's good to see that, that kind of thing. And I've noticed a lot of MMA fighters coming back into no-gi jiu-jitsu competition as well.
yeah,
Maybe in their off season or once they retire.
yeah. It's good fun, that's for
It's
sure.
good
And
fun.
it's I'm a believer. Like it's definitely got more of a crossover to MMA. I do believe that there are a few attributes that gi will give you, especially when it comes to defending or getting off top spots or your neck,
Yeah.
understanding the choke. But there's
Okay.
no doubt that, of course, no gi. And I think in terms of you said your coach was a very
Yeah.
good coach. I 100% believe you, and I'll tell you why. I think the
Yeah.
best MMA coaches out there, they are some of the famous ones for sure, but I think there's a lot of gems out there who people don't know, like unpolished diamonds.
Yeah.
And I've met some of these guys where you're like, wow, man, you are phenomenal, man. So
I, I think James in particular, I think he will be at some point. He'll have a champion in the UFC. That's my opinion. He's dedicated his life to this stuff, and the young guys that he's got coming through at the minute, people like Sean Clancy, try to think of some of his brother as well, Stephen Clancy. He's got a guy called Mark Ewan who's also fighting this Saturday in the Hydro as well. I think I don't know if he's on the undercard or if he's on the main card. I think he's maybe still on the undercard, but he's just incredibly talented. And I think that these guys are able to mix it up with the best in the world at this stage, and their names to look out for. They'll be very, very successful.
I think when it comes to contact sports,
Mhm.
I believe that the British Isles or Britain, as I would say, I think
Yeah.
it's a sleeping dragon, and I'll tell you why. A lot of people don't know about rugby.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Now, I remember just the only thing I remember rugby is three things. First is they drink like wow. Okay,
Wow.
if drinking
Yeah,
was
yeah.
an Olympic sport, these boys are the Mark Phelps or whatever. Second, all they're built like sorry my language from pardon my French brick crap brick shit houses.
100%
This would
brick
say.
shit houses. Yeah,
And they know the word go, like it's all go. Like if they have to fight and the injuries and the build up and that constant scrum. You
Yeah.
take that mentality, you put it to MMA, give them some technique.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're right. We do have to. Scotland and Britain has to get a better wrestling pedigree. But you have a
Yeah.
sleeping dragon, my man. Sleeping dragon right there.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And you know that in the past, some rugby players have came onto the mat in jiu-jitsu, have never trained jiu-jitsu a day in their life. And you go
Yeah.
with them, and you're like, you don't believe them. You think you've grappled, because they're on that field, they're fighting every single game. Like as we call it, they're
sure.
tackling people. They know how to apply pressure because of the scrum.
No
They're built.
pads.
No pads.
No pads.
They have that natural build because rugby is it's a physical sport, and they have probably most importantly, they have the right mentality as well. Like we spoke about earlier, they've developed that warrior spirit, and it really shines through.
They also have the ability to grind because rugby, it isn't a stop and start sport. It's just this constant motion, and you're always working, right? So that would be exciting to see, like if you had some big lads, I'm saying, like you had some big guys come in from rugby, like props or stuff, who had a bit of endurance, and they came to learn jiu-jitsu or the MMA club. It's going to be scary time for heavyweights, right?
Yeah, I think we've got some guys who started off in rugby and who are now training jiu-jitsu and MMA. And it's just it's an easy switch up for these guys because they're so used to fighting. They're so used to that contact and taking hits as well. So on the rugby field, I've never played rugby, thankfully, but I would imagine some of these guys they're taking huge hits to the body, to the sternum, and they're getting used to the. I've got friends that play rugby, and they're tough guys.
I was once in an airport in a layover. And I was going from one side to another. I can't remember where I was. And there was this massive crowd against literally one of the biggest dudes I've ever seen in my life. His legs were literally the size of both of my legs. And I'm a big guy, okay?
Yeah.
And I asked someone, and they said that's New Zealand's #1 rugby player, the Michael Jordan rugby player. I can't remember the guy's name. Someone told
Jonah
me.
Lomu, maybe?
It might have been him. I just all I remember was the size of him and the size of his neck. I just was like you don't see wrestlers like that. Like
It's
it was
terrifying.
something else. And then apparently that guy can run like 100 meters faster than pretty much anyone. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But man, so I have one other question. How do you hold? Like I'm an older guy, as I've said probably 20 times this podcast, so I think people understand that. How do you have that work-life balance between training, teaching, family?
The honest answer is I don't have any balance whatsoever. So for the last, basically just grind through it and just do what I can, and I put out as much content as I possibly can on martial mindset. I do as much jiu-jitsu as I possibly can when I can do it, and obviously teaching comes first because that's what pays the bills. I'm hoping to eventually at some point, if I can keep everything going with martial mindset and with my online activities, that I could maybe drop some days in my teaching job.
That's the dream for sure. I agree.
That's the dream, but that's a long way off. So we need to just keep grinding through, keep training. I've actually fallen away from jiu-jitsu for the past 8 weeks or so. My wife got a new job. She's working, and our shift patterns basically. She's on a rota, so I need to look after my wee boy from time to time. So jiu-jitsu's went on the back burner, unfortunately. But I need to get back on the mats and start to piece things together and shoot for that purple belt. And I would like to compete again as well. So, but there's as you probably know yourself, there's not much balance involved. It's just go.
None. Go. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I had it a bit for a long time. Then I found out I had some kind of heart condition that I have to have surgery. So. And that specific condition, I can't raise my blood pressure or get any contact because my aorta is massive. But In the end of the day, I do what I can. I put the videos just like you do. You know, we
Yeah.
have our reels. We try to propagate martial arts in general. So
Do, do,
what's your plan? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
do you make all of your videos? Do you have a team working for you, or
No,
do you
I do everything. I do
really?
everything, and
Wow,
that's why they're
wow.
so bad.
They are not bad. No, no. I think honestly, it's the best grappling content
Thank
online
you.
at the moment, and
I
it's
appreciate it.
only going to grow because it is great stuff.
Yeah.
But like, so do you do it as a full-time job, or do you do it?
No, I have my actual job is online marketing.
Yeah.
And email stuff with stuff. But it's my passion. I used to, when I was younger, I wanted to compete. I wanted to be like everyone, but I wasn't good enough, and that's fine. But it's still my passion, and until maybe 2 years ago, I used to pretty much grapple every day just with friends. It
Yeah.
just happens my friends are extremely, extremely good, and it's a passion, and I want to propagate. I'm sure, like you, it's I want to show people about grappling and
Yeah.
use martial arts, and I think there's a lot of times not enough light shown onto grappling styles, and I
Yeah.
think people are too fast in tribalism. They're like, oh man, that's not my tribe, so that sucks, right? But
Yes.
it isn't about that. Like
No.
martial mindset, I'm looking, you have, for example, I'm sorry guys, I'm looking at this, he has like the craziest amazing content. I remember this Chinese boxer against a Wing Chun guy. I
Yeah.
remember
Yes.
that clip. And then you have the Canadian Howard here pinned from
Harold Howard.
UFC.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
Harold
yes. Well,
Howard.
I do some work for the Lights Out podcast, the MMA history podcast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Chris Lytle, the former UFC fighter.
Yeah,
So I put together their clips for Instagram and their YouTube shorts, and
fantastic.
so I work with them, and it's something else that's just,
He
you
was a
know,
great fighter, by the way.
he was a
He was a
fantastic
great
fighter, a great
fighter.
boxer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think they're doing a good job at shining a light on MMA history and how
Yeah,
we got to this point, which I think is something that's important.
yeah.
It would be a shame to lose those stories and those characters. They have some
Oh
great
yeah.
guests on the podcast. And I think just by pure coincidence, it's kind of the same thing that I'm trying to do with martial mindset. I think if you'll notice, most of the things I put out are like kind of old school, the like style versus
I
style
love that.
matches, which I
I love
like
it.
that kind of thing. And I just find the whole topic really interesting. Like, yeah, at some point in time, you won't have individual styles. We'll get to a stage where it's pretty much just MMA, and in some ways that's a good thing because people are then, they're learning the transitions between the different art forms. But I think we also then at that point in time we lose something as well.
Yeah.
So I'm trying my best to document, the kind of
And you're
individual
doing
art.
an amazing job.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, like your stuff is amazing on that. And I think it's incredibly important. And the reason is, so I think MMA will turn to a style, but what'll happen is just like jiu-jitsu, it'll get so specialized that because it's going to be a spectator sport, they have to keep it with certain rules,
Yes.
that if you introduce a different rule and you don't come from one of the, let's say, the roots of MMA, like a hard, for example, kickboxing
Sure.
part, or let's say they let headbutts in again, right? Completely changes everything. So I think
Yeah.
you're right. And those old arts, I think, especially when you get older or when you're young, I think they have a lot of value to people, and it's important for us to keep them.
I think it's nostalgia for a lot of people like myself who came up
Yeah.
in the traditional martial arts era. I still prefer the older films. So like I still prefer like your Jean-Claude Van
Oh,
as
yeah.
cheesy as they are, like Steven Seagal, I don't necessarily think he's an amazing fighter or anything
Casey
like that.
Ryback.
Yeah, but I prefer those old school films. So for guys like
Nico.
Nico, for guys like us who are getting on a bit, it's good to look back and just enjoy it for what it is.
Okay,
But
top 5
yeah,
old school martial art videos. Let's go. What are yours?
top
And
five
don't
old
pussy out now. Don't pussy out now. We need top 5, mate.
top five old school
Old
martial
school,
arts.
like up to the 95, 96 area.
So I would have to say, well, UFC one with Hoist Gracie.
Oh,
Is
yes.
definitely, and I think that first fight where Gerard Gordeau kicks the sumo wrestler, and
Wow.
his tooth goes flying out the octagon. That for me is iconic because it was like nobody knew what was going to happen. It was just,
Yeah.
it was completely uncharted territory. Number two, I would put a fight I posted recently about this. It was a fight between a man called Rick Rufus and a Thai fighter called Chang Puk. The fight
Yes.
that changed kickboxing history
Yes. With the leg kicks all the time.
with the low kicks, and
Yeah.
that for me is a pivotal moment in kickboxing. It
Absolutely.
completely changed people's perspective on what was available and what would work in a fight. Number three, what would I go for there? So you put me on the spot. It's so difficult.
It
It's
is difficult, right?
it's
Because there
difficult
was
to
an
think.
evolution from every fight.
There's different. I like fights where there's been something like pivotal that's happened. And it's changed people's perspective of martial arts. So what would I go for? Number three. I'm struggling to think off the top of my head.
It's tough, not because you don't know, it's because there's so many.
There's
There's
just
just so
so many,
many.
and it's so varied. Um, I liked a lot of the old school kickboxing tournaments.
Oh,
So
yeah.
like the things that were the predecessors to the K1s in Japan.
Like Rob
Guys like
Kamen, kind of
Rob,
Raymond
uh,
Deckers.
Raymond Deckers. I think. Well, he was more. That's probably a good number three. Raymond Deckers versus Koban. In Lumpinium, they had quite a few fights, but that showed people that a Dutchman or a European could go and compete with the Thais at their own game,
Oh,
but do it completely differently. So he was like he was more of a boxing, Dutch kind of kickboxing
yeah.
orientated guy, and he was doing it that way and
He was
beating the
tough,
Thais.
man. He was
He was
tough.
an incredible kickboxer.
Yeah.
And, what would my next? So that's we're at three so far. I'll try and squeeze out another two.
I'm trying to think of ones that maybe you would, but you have you have a deep knowledge as well. So, it if you look at martial arts in general, I think definitely
hmm
Hoist Gracie. I think you nailed the two. Rick Rufus, that one. I think Raymond
hmm
Deckers, that's another one. I would probably say, I think, in my opinion, Mark Coleman's first run into the UFC when you saw wrestling. I think
That's a
that
good.
one.
That's
I don't know
definitely a
if
good
it's up
shout.
there. It's in the top 10 because I don't know how
Well,
pivotal it is, but
I think it's hugely pivotal because it showed people the importance of wrestling, and it showed people that that size and strength does matter as well. Because there was
yeah.
this kind of, I think, in the UFC in the early
And a
days,
vegan diet.
and a vegan diet, yeah.
He was a
secret,
vegan, man. That's how he got those
secret,
muscles.
secret juice. So I think back in the day with jiu-jitsu, they'd sold this almost, I would call it a lie personally, that size and strength were almost irrelevant
Yeah.
and that it was just purely about technique. But at the end of the day, when guys like Mark Coleman started coming in, it
Scary.
kind of it dispelled that myth, I
I
think,
think
because
him and then Mark Kerr, especially because what happened is he went to the Abu Dhabi and he also was rocking.
yeah,
He was him in the Japan, not Japan, the I think it was World Combat Championships or Valley to Brazil. I can't remember the name.
Valley
My
Valley Judo Japan, that tournament, and then you had also
no
Pride. He fought in Pride as
Pride,
well.
but the one in Brazil when he was headbutting Fabio Gurgel's. I say Gurgel, but it's
Oh yeah, yeah, the
yeah
Valley Judo
the
Championships. Yeah,
yeah that one I think
yeah.
was there, and I think a lot of people are gonna bash me on this. I'm gonna put two fighters there. I think Frank Shamrock because I think he was the first real MMA like where you saw MMA, and then I would say
Mhm.
Kazushi Sakuraba when he was getting his championships of the Gracie Killer. The fact that he was coming out, I think those are
That's definitely something as well. So, try to think of anybody else from that era. So,
like that.
Sakuraba. That again, I think that dispelled the whole Gracie invincibility myth as well.
That
Sakuraba
was
he
a
beat
tough
like
one.
How many Gracies did he?
I think he
Did
beat
he beat?
5 because he got Hoyler, he got
Mm-hmm.
Henzo, he got Hoyce.
Mm-hmm.
I can't,
Wow.
was it Ryan?
I think
I
so.
f-
Yep. I think he beat
and
like
there was a
5.
fifth one. Can't remember more because I have a bad memory.
Right. Just in terms of jiu-jitsu, I think when Eddie Bravo
For
beat,
sure.
right, so the whole
Wow.
the rise of 10th Planet, that was something else because I don't think really at the time anybody expected him to beat Hoyler. So that was,
Hoyler. Yeah.
yeah.
And then there was the Marcelo Garcia dominance era. That was, I
Mm-hmm.
remember when Marcelo first came and he got Vitor Shaolin. And because Shaolin before that, he was
Yeah,
the man in MMA. And like
that's right.
that was incredible.
Huge upset.
What happens in jiu-jitsu, I think that there's these little eras. So what happens, it's like they get to a peak, then everyone tries to catch up, the peak develops, then it
Mm-hmm.
goes again. And right now in jiu-jitsu, I think the era is in a pass, right? Because you have the Gordon Ryan, and he's still top
Yeah,
dog, but now I think you're gonna see a lot of huge amounts of wrestling, which we're seeing right now. And
yeah,
because of that, what'll come after that is how to counter wrestling, which would have to be tight and close guard type of thing.
yeah.
If you're going to be taken down, you want to keep them closed because they'll pass.
So
But
that's going to go full circle and back to the old school
I
close
think
guard
so
game.
too. I
Yeah, I
think
think
so.
so.
That's my.
And I like the fact that some tournaments are promoting the stand up. You need to. I think there's like certain rules where you need to stand up for a
Yeah.
portion of the fight before you just pull guard, just sit on your butt kind
Yeah.
of thing. I think that's important because
I think it's very important.
I think it's better to watch as a spectator, and I think it's
Yeah.
also important to preserve the integrity of the art form because I'm
And the
not.
effectiveness.
And the effectiveness of the art form, as we've spoken about with self defence, because again, it's like a rule set thing. If you're just immediately sitting to your butt and scooting towards a person trying to enter in on their legs, like that's great for sport jiu-jitsu if you're a good leg locker, but in a self-defense context, that's like suicide, right? It's just doesn't make any sense.
Especially against someone who's really good at punting those rugby balls. He's gonna get either balls or the what do you call the royal chops over there. But
Did you watch the CGI event?
oh yeah,
Yeah,
that was. Listen, I'm not putting down Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi was also great,
yeah, was great.
but
Yeah,
CJI was the breath of fresh air that I think was missing.
yes.
Wow,
Wow, and
wow,
I think it's good to finally see athletes in jiu-jitsu, getting paid as well, because I
absolutely,
think
yeah,
that's going to encourage another explosion in the sport when people realise there's a path and they can actually
yeah,
make a living from this stuff. We're going to see the quality, I think, like every other sport, once the money's there, the standard's going to improve
yeah. At
over
the pro
time.
level, for sure. At the pro
Yeah.
level, it definitely. That event was great. It was
Mhm.
actually, can I be honest? I think it was one of the best grappling events I've ever seen.
Yeah.
In the Abu Dhabi, you had some really big things that happened. For example, the biggest, I think, obviously, is Nicholas Marigali getting beat by a purple belt who had a high wrestling
Yeah.
pedigree, and he got thrown. He landed improperly, broke his arm really badly, and got choked.
That's right.
Which there is something interesting. During the Olympics, I think was right before CJI, and there was one guy who kept on putting his arm out to land, and I was sitting with one guy, and he said, "Man, how does this judoka not know how to? You never put
Hmm.
your arm out." And I said, "Of course he knows, man. He's in the Olympics. He's from, I think he was from Tajikistan.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
he knows exactly what to do. He's putting it out because he doesn't want to lose that gold medal." And between losing a medal, or not getting medal, and between
Yeah.
his arm and getting into a medal position, he's going to choose his arm to go, right?
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting, the whole go around about martial arts. So what I notice in your page that I like,
Hmm.
when you talk about style to style, the interesting
Yeah.
thing it's not just that, it's almost like a philosophy against a philosophy, right? So for example, the philosophy of, like, Taekwondo has a philosophy, for example. Keep the
Yes.
guy at range, get him with very accurate kicks,
Hmm.
and you'll knock him out. jiu-jitsu is a philosophy too, which is like you said, green, red, green. In the end of the day,
Yeah.
every jiu-jitero is going to have that.
Yeah.
Now there was, I think it was called Human Weapon. There was a show.
Yeah, I remember the Human Weapons series. That was cool.
With because there was two. There was the one with the big bald football player. Fight Science. There was two. Yes.
Yes.
So Human Weapon, they had the MMA guy Jason, and then they had the big Bill guy.
And
they went.
Yeah. I remember.
They went to
that.
Korea, and they sparred the Korean Taekwondo guy who knocked them both out in a Taekwondo match. That was surprising, but I always thought it's interesting. Like, we're so fast to put down everything, right?
So that's and listen, I've been guilty of that in the past as well.
Me too.
Because
Me too.
I kind of lost faith in Taekwondo because the club, the place that I was training in, the organisation, it wasn't a competitive place. So we were turning up to tournaments, having done very little preparation, and we were getting beat by guys who were clearly kickboxing, and that was their interpretation of Taekwondo was basically kickboxing. Yeah. And I think it all depends. It comes down to the training method.
There you go.
And the rules of engagement. So,
what is the goal?
What is the goal? And then people will adapt. And I think when you have the same rule set and you have the same kind of level of competition, it should eventually look the same, regardless of what you call it. So you could have Taekwondo or Korean kickboxing or Muay Thai. If you're fighting under the same rule set, there's going to be like a certain amount of things that work and a certain amount which don't. And
for me,
that's that.
I think the ultimate, I think when it comes to striking, I'm a big fan of Muay Thai. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Just like in grappling, in the sense of grappling, for me, I'm a huge fan of freestyle wrestling and jiu-jitsu. I like a little bit of catch in there, shudo, but that's for me. So people ask a lot of times, they say, well, I do Muay Thai. Should I train Taekwondo? Maybe not, but maybe there are some drills there or rules that you can add to develop attributes.
Yes, there's some techniques that are often overlooked, and I think one of them's the spinning back kick.
Oh yeah, Joe Rogan, right?
Yeah, and Muay Thai fighters often, they stand very square because they can block easier, they can get all their weapons off, from that square kind of upright stance. Mm-hmm. And what I found from my Taekwondo days, that was one of the benefits. If you miss a round kick and you're almost back exposed, if you very quickly throw out that back kick, you almost always catch people. And that can be a devastating kick. You can finish a fight with that kick.
Especially on the liver, man. That thing hits the liver, you're done.
Oh, it's devastating. There used to be a guy, I don't know if he's still around. He was on YouTube. He was called Quan Kicker. This is going way back. Right, and he did both. He did Muay Thai and Taekwondo. I used to watch a lot of his stuff, and I would see him using that exact technique. Obviously from his Taekwondo background. So I think it's important to never discount anything.
It's a question of how to implement it or where to implement it.
Right. And also I think some of these different styles, they work better in different arenas. So Taekwondo and karate, I think, work pretty well in MMA when you're inside an octagon or a cage.
I agree.
You don't have the corners of a ring. Think like Raymond Daniels or Michael Venom Page, back in the day, Mark the Wizard Weir in the UK.
Lota Machida,
Stephen Thompson. So I think when you can cut these people off inside a ring and you can pin them into the corner, their boxing's maybe not as refined as it should be, and you can catch them. But when they've got the distance to kind of green zone, red zone type thing, and they can blitz between the two, that's when they become really, really dangerous.
And they have something that a lot of guys don't have. They have accuracy. The word accuracy comes from these arts. It's interesting. Accuracy comes from these arts. When I think of Stephen Thompson, I think of, if you give him a little hole to hit, he's going to get inside and it's going to hurt. And what you said is quite interesting. It's like in grappling, a lot of guys sometimes are afraid of grip fighting. Okay, and it's not the grip fighting; it's the fact that they could get thrown. So a good way to get them used to it is to start and do belt wrestling, okay?
Okay.
And only allow like a slow type of throw so they can learn how to roll, and they get used to fighting in the grip instead of breaking off, because of belt wrestling, a lot of styles, if you even break the grip, you lose. So I think that, and does it mean that you're going to go in the UFC with belt wrestling?
No.
Maybe, but probably not, right?
No.
We both know that.
Yeah.
But does it mean that you can solve some issues that a fighter has by implementing just a round or two over a few months, right? Every week or every training session. So I think this is where a lot of the, and I think this is where a lot of the new fighters coming from other cultures are able to catch people. It's they have these like micro moments in the distance of the combat area where they dominate. You know, for example, Khabib and the Dagestanis from his gym, they know exactly where to dominate, right? So that transition, they get you on and you are done.
That makes sense.
In striking, I guess, like, you know, what kills me when a lot of grapplers are like, but it's only striking. Striking is actually quite a refined art. You have to know a lot about beats, like timing, beats. That's right. You have to open. And also, with those small MMA gloves, the value of boxing is even more because of the defense. Because all it takes is like, you don't have a big glove to block. Block.
Yeah.
So, I think, you know what I think? I think that we're still, everyone says, it's already developed. MMA is, I think, about 90%, 92% where we are. But I think this last 8%, 10%, it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens. Also, now the UFC just changed the rules again.
Yeah.
If we had pride rules, like what would happen? You'd see Muay Thai fighters start to really...
start to shine.
I think with pride rules, they would really be amazing.
I think, do you think in the UFC or modern MMA, they're almost bringing in rules to like keep the fight standing, almost the rules that go against the grappler? And I think that's a real shame, because thinking back to the old school MMA, when it went to the ground, there was no stand-ups. You had to work from that position.
I agree.
It can be boring for people to watch. You know, if people are kind of caught in a stalemate, you know, and somebody's stalling, I can understand why it's not a marketable product, but I liked that format better because it gave the grappler a fair crack at the whip. When they're constantly standing people up, the striker gets another chance.
Absolutely.
You know,
also the striking on the ground. Although if you weren't a good grappler, you could get nailed. But if you're a really good jiu-jitsu and you get mount on someone, and that head comes boom like that, right?
Of course.
I put a video of Brian Johnson. I don't know if you remember him, but there's a video of him mounting someone, just raining headbutts on him.
That's right.
Completely different game, right?
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Those knees on the ground for the, you know, like from that kind of front headlock position.
Oh yeah.
Alan Goes gets knocked out with the.
Yeah.
Who was that? Was that maybe?
I think it was Pride, right?
From Pride. Who? I'm trying to think.
I don't.
What was it? Colt? No. Can't remember who it was.
I remember Mark Kerr with those knees. I remember all the wrestlers.
I think it was maybe Mark Kerr. He landed some big knees from that top position. You know, that kind of front headlock position, right on the top of his head, and knocked him out. And it's just
also elbow. Like, it's a different game. I agree, and I think, you know, it comes to like the at the end of every meal, there's the bill, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you want to make the best meal possible for the viewer, probably what the UFC is doing is there, because most people want to see knockouts and huge hits, right?
That makes sense.
But the best for martial arts, the truth of martial arts, would just say, guys, go. You know, and what would happen most likely is if it hits the ground, you would see probably more boring fight, you know, and you would see a longer fight, more to do with even the build of the fighters would be different.
I think so.
But I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go. And also USC has a very big dominance into MMA scene because they have a great product, right? Everything they do is proper there. They treat their fighters proper. Well, I don't know because I'm not a UFC fighter, but it seems to me that it's great. I don't think maybe they could pay them more because a lot of guys are arguing about that. And they don't have the argument of like, we don't have money, where they have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that would be beneficial for them, not because it would make the UFC better, but it would make much harder for the other events that are trying to compete with the UFC to compete.
Yeah, I think some of these other events pay more for some of the lower tier fighters. So people who are just on the come up, I think are going to go to like PFL, and I think PFL is bought over Bellator. I'm not sure, but they're going to go elsewhere and maybe eventually end up in the UFC once they've had a few fights and they've built a real big name for themselves. I think UFC will always be like the maybe not always. I think
it's the NFL.
I think it's the NFL. I think it's established name
of MMA. We mean
of MMA.
It's the NFL. Yeah.
It's the and I think eventually, you know, some other organisation will come up and it will clip at the heels, and that's a good thing because competition's a good thing, and it drives progress. And I think that's what we're seeing. You know, CGI and ADCC is competition can only be a good thing. You know,
absolutely. You know, one of the things that I saw as a spectator, okay, and as a fan, was years ago you had Bellator with some really good fighters that were on the run there, like who nailed it. PFL, you had King of the Cage less. That's a little bit too old, and there wasn't the money thing there. But you saw a lot of fighters that actually, I think if they were crossed over into the UFC, they would have been champions. But because they're getting paid more, we saw the highlight of what they were doing in Bellator. And because they're in Bellator, they don't get the credit they do that they would have had they been in the UFC.
Yeah.
And that's a little hard to see as a fight fan. But I think it is what it is, right?
The person that springs to mind there when you said that was Fedor.
Oh yeah, Fedor, Eddie Alvarez, I think during his peak. Jay-Z, Calvacante, Alexandre Pequeño. I don't know if you know who he is from Luta Libre. He was decimating in Japan with his guillotina. You had Shaolin, Vitor Shaolin Ribeiro. There were so many.
So many good guys who.
But Fedor's he's the one. And when he did come off into it was a different time. He got older, and it just. But I mean, in Pride, when he was fighting, yes, he fought some guys like Zuluzinho. I wouldn't like to fight Zuluzinho, but I'm saying he also fought Crow Cop.
He fought Crow Cop.
He also fought Crow Cop. That fight, I think that is the fight in MMA.
Yes. It was just amazing. And thinking about Crow Cop in the UFC, when Gonzaga, the grappler, knocked Crow Cop out with a high kick, that's another crazy moment. I remember watching that live at the time. And just nobody expected that. Nobody could see that one coming.
Do you remember Crow Cop's leg? Like,
that knock... it folded. Yeah, it was horrible. It just went limp and folded underneath him, and then the referee comes along and just pops it back into place. I mean,
you know, I was once cornering a fighter in Jungle Fight in Slovenia.
Jungle Fight, I
think it was Jungle Fight 7. And Crow Cop was backstage, okay? And I'm walking down the hall, and I see this truck coming. He was so wide, and his legs, man.
Oh, his thighs were huge. I remember that.
Man.
Grapplezilla.
And I'm taller than him, but I just remember thinking, I was like, that hits you. That hits you. And I have a friend, a good friend, who he was his grappling coach in Croatia. He came from, he was a black belt in jiu-jitsu, also Brazilian national level Greco. He was in the Pan Ams, took bronze. He's very tough. And I asked him, how's Crow Cop? And he goes, human weapon. Human weapon. Crow Cop's a human weapon. And, and now you have it. I mean, in the heavyweight division. You have Nagano, for example. That's a human weapon.
Oh,
I love him.
Yeah, I think is he due to fight in PFL as well, or is he?
I think so. MMA? He lost his son, unfortunately. His young son died.
I remember hearing that.
I can't imagine. As I'm a father, I can't imagine what went through his mind. And that, I don't know. I don't know. And the reason I don't know, I know I've heard what he's doing. I don't know if mentally he's at the point where he'll say yes, no. I mean, that's got to take a lot out of a person.
Yeah, for sure.
God forbid that would happen. And Francis, if you're hearing, sorry to hear that. We all are behind you on that.
Yeah.
He's probably not listening though, but if you are, you know.
You never know.
Who is the most famous Scottish MMA fighter of all time?
Of all time, that's a tricky question. I would probably say Paul Craig, who's still currently fighting. It's got to be up there.
How old is he? 53 or something?
Oh, Paul Craig, I think he's about my age. He's maybe like 35, 36, that kind of.
Okay, Paul's going to punch me in the face for saying he was 53 right now. 53!
He also trains at higher level, the same place, under Coach James Doolan. I think he originally came from the Scottish Hit Squad, which is another good MMA
what
gym.
What a name, huh?
The Scottish Hit Squad, it's a cool name, yeah. But he's did some really good things in the UFC. If you think about it, he's a triangle specialist. And also he does that good triangle and armbar combination. He's caught people right at the last second of the fight. Ankalaev. He broke, is it Jamal Hill? He broke Jamal Hill's arm as well with the armbar. So a talented guy. I think he's due to fight again soon. I can't remember when it is.
I know in Canada we had a guy who had Scottish heritage, redhead. Jason McDonald, Jason McDonald from Red Deer.
Remember him? Yeah,
I mean he's he's a Scot, right? He has
That's
that.
right.
And he was tough, and of course you're gonna have in Canada you're gonna have a lot of guys who have like Rory McDonald. You're gonna have a lot of Scots. I mean it's just natural that Scots. But in Scotland, another one is, yeah.
Another one would be Stevie Ray as well, Stephen Ray, because you know he had a good run in the UFC. He beat some really good guys, and then he fought in, I think it was PFL when he landed that right at the start of PFL when it was just, you know, when it just started. He landed that nice twister. It's an unusual setup. I'll send you the video.
Please do, yeah.
I think that they're calling it the Scottish twister.
Oh yeah,
and he caught.
I got to see that. Yeah, I got to see that.
He caught Anthony Pettis with the Scottish Twister, who's a big name in him. You know, Anthony Pettis back in the day was huge, and he's beaten some good guys in the grappling scene as well. He does some no-gi grappling. We beat Paddy Pimblett in Polaris, in a grappling match. I think he caught him in a leg lock or something. So he's a really, really good guy.
Yeah,
good Scottish.
Paddy's legit, man. Paddy's legit. And if he beat him, he's got some skill. You know, do you find in Scotland that there's like Scotland versus England versus Wales versus Ireland type in terms of MMA? Like, is there that there, or is it like...
I'm not sure. Like, there is in terms of football, for sure. Like
football,
national.
For sure.
Right. So, soccer, you know, football or soccer.
Yeah.
In MMA, I don't think the same thing really exists.
Because I think you guys have the same goal. You're from an island that wants to rule. I didn't mean that. You're from an island that wants to be a player in the MMA game. So the goal is, if you see an Englishman win, you're not thinking, oh, it's English. You're thinking, yes, it's one of us. And if an Englishman sees a Scot, he's not saying it's a Scot. He's saying it's one of us, man.
I think so. Yeah.
So I think that's
as far as I can see with MMA or martial arts in general, it's a great unifier. It brings everybody together. You know, it's not divisive. It doesn't drive a wedge the same way maybe football does. And when I say football, I mean soccer. You know, you guys will know that soccer. I think that's one of the things that kind of going back to why I started in martial arts. The football scene where I live is pretty toxic, to be honest. I don't know if you know, it's
Rangers
like
Celtic.
Rangers Celtic.
It's like the famous one, man. Like it's one of the big boy ones.
Right, so it's the famous rivalry, and
are you Rangers? Are you Celtic?
I'm neither. Like I'm just that's why it's a big part of the reason I got into martial arts, because I just think that side of things is so dumb. Really, it's so stupid. and it's very divisive. And I think like when the good thing about things like jiu-jitsu or any martial art is when you get on the mat or you get on the boards, it doesn't matter if you could be from any background, any football
Yeah.
team, any status in life. You've got professionals on the mat, you've got people who are unemployed, you've got students, and
You can
everybody.
have a billionaire and then a homeless guy. In the end of the jiu-jitsu, they're
Yeah,
equal, man.
everybody's just there to learn, and everybody's just there
Yeah.
to choke each other out, and
Yeah.
it's a great thing.
Absolutely. We're gonna now conclude.
Sure.
Andy, I
Yeah.
want you to tell people about how can they get to know more about martial mindset and your projects coming up. Guys, by the way, I'm going to put everything in the socials, so if you want to read about it, you'll see all the social accounts. But Andy, go ahead.
So Martial Mindset on Instagram, it's at Martial_mindset_, and you can get everything that I'm doing there. But I would also encourage you to please check out my YouTube channel, because on Instagram, I've managed to grow to a size of maybe 50,000 followers, but my YouTube's really struggling, so I would really appreciate it if you would hit up YouTube and like some and subscribe.
Very cool, man. So, Andy, it's been a pleasure having you on, man. You're a cool dude. Thanks for
No,
enlightening us a lot on the Scottish martial art and MMA
yeah,
culture. I think
anytime.
that's cool.
Yeah,
And listen, man, I want you to have a great weekend. If you can, maybe have a
You
good
too.
shot of whiskey.
Actually, yeah, I'll have one tonight.
And
And
yeah,
and thanks so much for having me on your podcast. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and I've
my
learned
pleasure,
so
man.
much as well. And you're
Thank you.
based. There's one thing I meant to ask you. How did you start off in grappling as well? Like, so I was curious.
So my father is from the Soviet Union, so him and all his friends, especially his friends, they're like uncles of mine. All of us and the kids, we always wrestled. When we met, just wrestle.
Yeah.
We had got, and most of those guys came from the stands or Georgia, or you had some from Moldova and also Ukraine. But everyone wrestled pretty much.
Yeah.
So I was always wrestling since a kid. Then I got into shoot wrestling. I did. I had years. I did Kali and shoot wrestling. I was
All right.
always wrestling.
Yeah.
Wrestling at school. Wrestled at the club in college. Then I got into jiu-jitsu after seeing I think it was actually UFC 1 I saw, or 2. I can't remember which one. I was in Blockbuster Video. I wanted to get an action movie. I saw, just like most guys, what is this? Karate versus Kung Fu? I said, okay, let's see what's best. I saw Hoist, and that's it. I said, I got to learn jiu-jitsu. You couldn't find it anywhere. So I took shoot wrestling. I was big into that. Shuto. And then
Shuto.
we used to fly guys out to
Yeah.
Edmonton and seminars, and then that's it. Then I went around the world, and basically that's it. And I've wrestled,
That's
and
cool.
until about 2 years ago, I wrestled jiu-jitsu all the time. And
So it's,
I'm just a regular guy. I'm a dad. That's me.
Yeah.
I'm a dad. Yeah.
but it's in the blood, man, because it's like,
In the
your
blood.
family have wrestled, and
Yeah.
it's passed down. So that's it's
Also,
amazing.
like, I'm surrounded by like a lot of my friends are wrestlers, and they're all from like countries that are hard to say.
yeah.
Just joke. That's a joke. But yeah, it's quite like you. In the end of the day, that was it. I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta. Then I moved around the world, and there wasn't much to do except hockey, or you're just inside. What are boys going to do? They're going to fight. And so
gonna
we'd
fight.
wrestle, and then someone say, no, when you take down, you do this. This is how you
Yeah.
do in Uzbekistan. And this guy from Tajik, and then, you learn how to get out of that, how to pin, and then what would happen, you'd be every day after school there wrestling for 3-4 hours, and just, yeah. Anyways, yeah, like most kids like that. So,
Oh, that's cool. Well,
guys, thank you very much for tuning into the Grapplezilla Podcast. Check out Andy's stuff. He's got a great channel. Check out his YouTube. I actually been looking at it. Great channel as well. And also Scottish MMA. Let's get that growing as much as we can. And until next time, like, subscribe, and if you have something good to say, tell me. If you have something bad to say, even tell me, man. I'm all open to it. And Andy, have a great weekend, my man.
you too, my man. Thank you.
Thank you.